Greetings, it is I, Countess Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's time to continue our discussion on Vampire the Masquerade. So today I'm going to get into talking about injuries that your character can take, and I will talk about Torpor. So there are a lot of different ways your characters can take injury. The first and foremost, of course, combat. If I'm in combat, either melee or firefighting, my body will take damage. It's going to be the primary way your character will take damage. You, of course, have all your normal rules for soaking the damage, and possibly taking less, but you're doing exactly what it sounds like, taking damage from combat. Now the next thing I want to mention is you can take damage from falling. Falling damage maxes out at 20 levels of health. There's a chart in the book which describes what the levels of damage it takes, but eventually it gets to a point in time where every 10 feet it starts going up, because the chart doesn't tell you all the way down to 10 levels of health. I believe around 90 is when you take 10 levels of health. That's 90 feet of falling. That's a pretty big fall that you go splat. Now you can soak the damage from that. It is difficulty 8 to soak the damage from the fall. And as I said, it maxes out at 10, so you could survive very easily if you have, let's say, a bunch of fortitude or very high stamina. Next up is fire that I want to mention. Fire does aggravated damage. I've said this before, meaning it's very difficult to recover from it. It's very difficult to soak because you can only soak fire damage with fortitude, the discipline. If you do not have fortitude, you are kind of screwed when it comes to soaking this damage. You just take it. Now, the amount of damage and the difficulty for soaking the damage is dependent on two factors. The amount of damage you're taking, 1 to 3 damage, depends on how much fire. And this is per turn. So how much fire you're exposed to tells that. The intensity of the fire, how hot and how powerful it is in general, tells you how much difficulty it is to soak. Something that's like a very weak flame that might be very big might be a lot of damage but easy to soak, while on the other hand something that's like liquid metal you're dipping your hand into will be a lot more difficult to soak, but like your exposure may be only 1 damage if you're only getting your hand in a little bit. Sunlight is very similar to fire. It also does aggravated damage. You can also only soak it with fortitude, and you also would take damage every round you're exposed to it. Now, the type of rays of sunlight determines the difficulty, similar to the intensity of the fire. On the other hand, how much you're exposed to it, similar to the size of the fire, tells you how much damage you take. So if your entire body is exposed to it, you'd be taking 3 damage per turn, while like maybe if you're only your hands exposed, it's 1. On the other hand, if you're getting sunlight through the clouds, it's going to be easier to soak than if you're in the bright middle of the day, sunshine straight above you coming down at you. Now, there are sun lamps, which can mimic the UV rays of the sun pretty decently. They aren't a given that they're going to be deadly to a vampire. They're more times irritating and painful, though some can do damage to you, and some can even do aggravated damage to you. It's possibilities. It depends on how well it's made, how well it mimics the actual sunlight. So a sun lamp is going to be kind of case by case depending on things and how it would affect you. Now, heat can affect you very similar to what fire can do. Extreme amounts of heat can do damage to you similar to fire, would be aggravated too. But the thing is, it has to be very hot. It's not just like I'm in the desert kind of hot. It's like I am standing next to a furnace, not in the fire, getting radiated by a kind of hot. It's extreme amounts of heat. Oven hot. That sort of thing. You can toast in an oven. It's a similar rules and effects to the fire above, and you look to that chart for it. Now you can take damage from deterioration. What's deterioration? If you are, let's say, there's a couple of situations this can occur. One, you can be staked. The other is you could already be incapacitated through damage. If you should, whatever reason, be in a situation where you have to continually, you're unconscious and unable to do anything. For example, best one is stake. And you have to use blood points every day in order to sustain yourself. That's normal. You have to use blood every day to sustain yourself. Should your blood run out, you start taking damage. So if, let's say, you are already out of blood and you are incapacitated, you're already at the end there. But if you're, say, like out of blood and staked, you will start taking damage. Or if you're just staked in general, you start taking damage. You start losing your blood, and then you start taking damage. And once you reach incapacitated with 0 blood and incapacitated, you hit Torpor. You cannot die from deterioration. It can only drive you into Torpor at most, which I will describe a little later on in this episode. Now let's talk about diseases. A vampire can suffer from a human disease. Depending on the disease, it might actually affect a vampire. A vampire might take damage from the disease, it might take aggravated damage from the disease. Should a vampire fully heal while being affected by the disease, there's the possibility of removing it, especially for like the ones that would do aggravated damage. If you remove all the aggravated damage, you've cured the disease in yourself. The treatment of the disease varies. If you're not even affected by the disease, it's a little harder to notice. There's a possibility that you don't know what's going on. Then, if you don't know the disease isn't affecting you, you're a carrier of the disease. You basically transmit it. Whenever you would feed on someone, you would give them the disease. Now, there are rumors of vampire diseases, which specifically affect vampires, which could kill them in perhaps a couple of days at most. So, whether or not they exist? So, a stake in the heart. I talked about it a little bit. Let's talk about it now. A stake in the heart puts you in a state of suspended animation. It does not kill you. So if you drive a stake into a vampire's heart, they're just sort of in this like paralytic, almost suspended animation state. In that point in time, of course, they might hit Torpor because they'd be losing blood if no one removes the stake from the heart. But it's dependent on a situation. If you're just left to sit there, you're probably going to go into Torpor, and you're probably going to be that way until someone might remove that stake from your heart. It could still spell your death if there's fire or sunlight nearby. In combat, you can try to stake someone. Not only do I have to be successful in the combat, I have to get at least 3 successes if I'm planning on staking someone in the heart. And I probably have to do a certain amount of damage in order to pierce it into them in the first place. Now, extreme environments can be detrimental to a vampire. Cold, for example. Vampires can get frostbite and they can freeze. Like, you can actually freeze solid. You don't have body warmth as a vampire, so it's hard for you to stay warm and keep your body going. Clothing doesn't affect you the same way as it does a person. A person with clothing keeps their body heat in. You don't have body heat to do that. Now, granted, a vampire does a brief periods of time have body heat, like if they drink some blood. You might be able to sort of trap that with layers of clothing, but it's not a lot of heat. Should you be exposed to large amounts of cold? Depending on how much cold it is, depends on how often you roll it, but you'd roll a stamina plus fortitude check, difficulty 3. For every check you've previously made, increase the difficulty by 1. The longer you're out there, the more than likely you're going to start feeling the effects of freezing, or effectively freeze. How cold it is depends on how often you're probably going to have it. Your storyteller will tell you how often, or will just let you know occasionally, oh, you have to make another check, you've been out the cold too long. The exposure is dangerous that way. Now, a vampire is more resistant than a human, so you should consider how often a human might have to make checks against the cold and give more time for the vampire. The vampire has, as I said, more resistant than the human, is more than likely going to check less. So unless the conditions are incredibly extreme, like one of the Arctics, then you're probably not going to have to worry about making checks very often. Now, you can spend a blood point to produce a little bit of warmth in your body. It might help you stave off things for a little bit if you do that. It's something you can do, is spend blood for a little warmth. But it is very temporary, and it's like a little burst of heat you're putting in there, maybe to keep your body from freezing. It might come up in it. Now for the last thing, I'm going to talk about Torpor. I did mention a little bit ahead of time. Torpor is like this deep sleep that vampires can fall into in order to protect themselves when they're in incapacitated state without any blood. Now in this state, you're effectively helpless. You really can't do anything. There are some very powerful vampires which are said to be able to use some discipline while in Torpor, but it is much more rare kind of thing. Now, if you should hit Torpor, you lose a point in a physical trait of your choice. Effectively, you lose 1 point from one of your physicals, but you do get to choose it. The amount of time you're going to spend in Torpor is dependent on your humanity. If you have a very high humanity, you're going to spend very little time in Torpor. If you have very little or no humanity, you're going to spend a lot of time, centuries, possibly even millennia. The problem with Torpor is you also degrade humanity the longer you're in it. So it's a sort of catch-22, is when you first go in, depending on your humanity, depends on how long you're going to be in there. But once you've left it, depending on how long you were in the first place, it might have damaged your humanity even more. Now, you can go into Torpor voluntarily. It is actually something you can do. There might be a situation where you need to go into a sleep for a period of time. Either there's a risk of frenzying yourself or some other kind of problem that you don't want to lose control from. If you should do that, you don't lose the physical stat when going into Torpor. Which comes to the final thing, is if you are in a state of Torpor, voluntary or non, you still lose 1 blood per day. After that, if you're out of blood, you don't take the damage from degradation if you're in Torpor. So Torpor keeps your body safe should you still run out of blood. So when you wake up, you're more than likely going to be very hungry and going to need some blood at that point in time. So that's it for today. I went over injury, some of the different types of injuries you can take and the different sources of it, and some of the basic rules of it, and I also talked about Torpor. Please like this video, share this video, and subscribe to the Empire. We're always looking for more people to join us, and we're always looking to spread the word of it. So until the next time, I bid you farewell.